The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
There are very few people in East Timor who didn't lose a loved one in their two-decade fight for independence. So this ceremony, reburying the bones of the war dead at the National Martyrs Cemetery, was filled with grief. But it was also a day of pride, the 10-year anniversary of Timor's success in that push for independence from Indonesia, the neighboring country that had violently swallowed it whole in the 1970s after Portugal abandoned its longtime colony. Flanked by dignitaries from around the world stood Xanana Gusmao. Once a resistance fighter, he is now East Timor's prime minister. And José Ramos Horta, who lived for years in exile, lobbying for freedom for his country. Today, he is the president.
I have enjoyed it thoroughly, to be reattached culturally, physically, to part of my body and spirit, in spite of the difficulties we encountered in these last 10 years.
Timor Leste.
Difficulties of the past 10 years, because Ramos Horta, Gusmao, and their Timorese citizens have had to build their new country from the ground up. More than 100,000 people had died during the 24-year occupation, and when Indonesian troops finally withdrew in a spasm of violence, East Timor was left in ruins. Even today, its fragility remains obvious. Half its people live below the poverty line. Burned buildings remain on many corners. Unemployment runs as high as 40%. But overcoming adversity is not new to Timorese like Eduardo Bello Suarez, a former guerrilla fighter now making the transition to ordinary citizen.
For me, I myself, I have obligation. And I believe that everyone has obligation to feel the independence of this country.
For Bello, that obligation meant starting a business and creating jobs. So he took a small grant given to him by the United Nations and made an investment.
My business, or my carpentry, started from this wood plate.
This is the very first thing you bought?
This is the very first thing I had.
In a place that has so little, even tables and chairs are important. Over 6,000 of Bello's desks are now in Timor's schools and government offices, and Bello now employs more than 600 Timorese. But even an army of Bellos is not enough to build a nation. From the beginning, that job has also fallen to the international community, backed today by 1,600 United Nations police and 800 peacekeeping troops from Australia and New Zealand. Although East Timor is only the size of Connecticut with a population of 1 million, the international community's job here has been one of its biggest ever undertaken.
This has been, to some extent, a laboratory for the international community, and continues to be.
Edward Rees first came to East Timor in 2000 with the UN mission. Today, he runs an international development group here.
This was probably the first place where the international community played a direct and highly intrusive and controlling role in the Ministry of Finance and the business of tax collection and revenue generation and natural resources management. And this was the first place that the United Nations played a role in the creation of a national defense force.
While the UN provided crucial emergency services to those displaced from the fighting and oversaw successful elections, it had never before tried to build the institutions needed to run a country, and was given very little time to do it.
The United Nations was here for 2 years. In 2 years, with the best of intentions, all the resources they could have mastered, and they did have a lot of resources, financial and human resources, they could not have built up a modern, functioning state within 2 years.
I think given the time that they had, they made expedited decisions in order to get things done, to keep to the schedule that New York had given them, and they were the wrong decisions for the long-term stability of the country.
Rees and other international analysts point to the mismanaged building of a professional military and police force, and a failure to properly integrate former guerrilla fighters, leaving them marginalized and disgruntled. Just as the UN was in its final stages of drawdown in 2006, political infighting tore apart these fragile institutions. Ian Martin is with the UN.
What happened then was an implosion in the security sector, in both the army and also in the police, who ended up fighting each other and with major divisions inside each of those institutions. And the state itself, in many ways, collapsed.
Violence cascaded into the streets. Dozens were killed and thousands again displaced. East Timor called for help. The international community sent new peacekeeping troops and scaled the UN back up. UN officials admit lessons were learned, that nation-building takes time.
Many people looking back feel that the disengagement of the international community in some ways came too quickly. So the first lesson, I think, is start with realistic expectations as to what a long business nation-building or state-building actually is.
Louise Arbour, president of the International Crisis Group, agrees there was pressure to leave from all sides.
In the case of Timor Leste, what you had, I think, on the one hand, is a great appetite for those who were constructing their country to be free as soon as possible to take over that responsibility. And at the same time, I think a Security Council, a UN, not particularly anxious to stay any longer than was absolutely necessary. So you had a mix there that I think probably encouraged an exit that in retrospect was probably premature.
Now that the international community is back, there is more focus on shoring up the police and military. Under the watchful eye of Australian peacekeepers, Timor's army and police recently squared off in a friendly shooting competition. Just 3 years ago, they were killing each other. Police Commander Longinus Montero is hopeful a corner has been turned. Why are exercises like this important for your forces?
This is one of the proof that we can show everybody that we are working as a part of the state institutions. We are working side by side. We're sharing our ideas. We have to leave all the past gone away. This is what this Timor needs, because our people is suffering too much.
It's uncertain if this camaraderie will hold. According to an International Crisis Group report, the Timorese government has resisted further reforms, such as instituting civilian control and defining the specific tasks of the army and police. Edward Rees says the UN is still struggling to figure out its role.
The United Nations police, which are the largest link in the chain, are also the weakest link in the chain. Police officers are not institution builders. Their job is to train people how to be police officers. Their job is not to teach people how to run a police service, particularly when it comes to the civilian oversight and management of legislative issues, personnel issues, logistics issues, financial issues, budgeting, planning.
The UN may be having better luck building East Timor's political institutions, including a 65-member parliament. Just a courtyard away from the impressive main chamber, a UN program is teaching staff everything from drafting legislation to scheduling a minister's daybook.
So you will help with the speeches, yeah?
UN staffer Tony Sisule came from Kenya to help.
Working with my colleague Jonas, he's fresh from university, and that's probably the best you're going to get, a fresh graduate. He doesn't have work experience. I bring 10 years or so of work experience from many other countries. So we basically try to transfer this experience to the young Timorese who are coming up. 2-3 years down the road, I think they should be able to handle a lot of the functions on their own.
Today, the capital Dili is becoming a bit of a boom town. Building construction is everywhere. There's a new slogan here: goodbye conflict, hello development. A well-attended exposition promises a comfort never before imagined. Much of this is because the country got lucky. It struck oil in the Timor Sea. Just after the crisis of 2006 hit, oil revenues began to flow, a boon for the struggling government.
Their chosen way of dealing with problems is handing out dollars.
Charles Shiner is a longtime activist who now works for a well-respected local watchdog group. He says East Timor has a habit of using its oil wealth to literally pay off disgruntled members of society, from dismissed army soldiers to displaced people.
So it sort of resolved the problems, the instant problems, but it created a pattern where people say, we don't get services from the government unless we make trouble. If we make trouble, we get money. If we just sit quietly and are good citizens and wait for the government to provide education or health care or roads or water, it's not going to happen. I think right now things are pretty peaceful, and we're lucky maybe, but I think that the elements of further conflict are still there.
Peace has to be paid for. Peace has to be bought, whether in Timor or anywhere in the world. And when we say it has to be paid for, it's not in the sense you buy people. In the sense you have to invest in creating infrastructures that create jobs. You have to hand out, when necessary, cash for the poorest.
And this is East Timor's big gamble. With a petroleum fund now worth more than $5 billion, the government is spending more of the money on short-term problems rather than saving it for the future. Besides the cash handouts, the government is spending millions importing a basic food staple, rice, in effect buying some calm and some time for the country's more long-term development goals.
I think if you're me, that's the wrong policy. I think if you're Timorese, it's the right policy. I think that they have made a calculated decision that we need to distance the community from the last event as far as possible. And so spending the money today in order to ensure that nothing happens in the next 5-10 years, as I'm sure that's the way they are thinking, strikes me as being sensible.
It's a fragile political equation, one that might still unravel under societal pressures. Chief among them, what to do with all the young unemployed people, a demographic that has become violent in the past. Here in the mountain town of Aleu, a U.S. government-funded program seeks to counter these risks by offering general classroom education and specific skills training to otherwise idle youth. This particular session only had slots for 50 students. Twice that many had applied. Anna Berry Martins is the program's chief trainer. Do you worry about the security of your country if there isn't more work like this to engage the young people, to train them, to get them jobs?
Before there were programs like this, violence among the youth was very high. But when they started participating in this program, they began to understand how to minimize the violence. If there is no opportunity like this, then we might have new problems.
We've historically looked at security in a very kind of traditional and maybe too narrow focus, a very sort of military approach to security. But it seems to me that what we need to look at, it's very ambitious, but I think we're there, is look at other indicators of real human security. You know, are girls returning to school? Are women safe in their communities? Is civil society occupying some space?
Another potential pressure point. East Timor has not pursued war crimes tribunals against Indonesia, calculating that it needs to keep the peace with its much larger neighbor.
Let's put the past behind. There will be no international tribunal. The greatest gift for me, greatest gift for us, is that we are free today. Those who committed crimes in the past, they are the ones who have to look themselves in the mirror and be ashamed and be haunted by the crimes they committed, not me. So this country must have the courage to move on.
But there are concerns that many Timorese may not have the same capacity to forgive and move on as President Ramos Horta. Seo Lopez is a Timorese activist recently recognized for her contribution to society. But she disagrees strongly with her president on the issue of justice.
It's about right and wrong, more than hanging generals and send them to jails. But we must establish that certain behavior are not tolerated anywhere in the world. Why should it be tolerated in East Timor?
For Lopez, this is one of the greatest risks facing East Timor today.
These people are so angry. They accumulate and accumulate. When there is an opportunity for all the closets to be open, because someone put a flame somewhere, it takes seconds, because it's just underneath the first skin of the surface. And this is still a very high risk.
As the flag was raised at East Timor's commemorations of its bold first steps 10 years ago, many open questions remain for its future. At stake is not just peace and prosperity for one of the world's newest nations, but also the role of the international community as it continues to grapple with the task of nation building.
It is part of the confetti of islands of Southeast Asia, bruised by decades of conflict and marked by a bloody transition to independence. Today, Revisited is taking you here to East Timor, more exactly to the capital, Dili. Originally a colony of Portugal, in 1975, East Timor declared its independence, but within days was invaded by Indonesia. There followed a horrific occupation. Amnesty says 200,000 people lost their lives, a quarter of the population. Perhaps not surprising then that in 1999, in a referendum organised with UN help, the people voted in favour of sovereignty. Well, since then, ongoing poverty and unemployment have led to further violence, the worst in 2006. And 2 years later, in 2008, the president, symbol of the fight for independence, survived an assassination attempt.
Even though I was shocked, I was almost killed, I didn't want Mr. Salsinha or any more Timorese to lose their life. Sorry, being a bit emotional. Too many Timorese have lost their lives, even the president himself. But Mr. Salsinha has to surrender to justice.
At the end of 2012, the Blue Helmets of the UN finally left East Timor after 13 years of peacekeeping. Dili has found political stability with successful elections, but poverty remains amongst the highest in the world, unemployment at around 40%. The government hoping for better days, thanks mainly to huge offshore oil and gas deposits. Well, our correspondents Cyril Payang and Pierre Veroux have seen what life is like there now through the eyes of 3 generations of the same family. Here's their report.
It's a typical morning in the neighbourhood of Kulahun in the heart of Dili. We're in front of the Casa Branca, the White House of Antonio and Alda Borges. Their family has lived here for generations. Their story is similar to many in East Timor, the predominantly Catholic part of this remote island between Indonesia and Australia. Kulahun is a poor neighbourhood, but in Dili there are no wealthy areas. In this street, people live, or rather survive, on less than $1 a day, the national average. But Antonio and Alda feel free now. Their young nation is only 10 years old, born from tears and blood after 4 centuries of Portuguese colonial rule, followed by 25 years of Indonesian oppression.
That's Antonio, a long time ago. He was young. He was a sailor. And these are his friends. They're all dead now. He disappeared during the Portuguese era, and he was killed by the Indonesians, him too.
At the time, there was no talk of independence. It was a forbidden word. We didn't even dream of such a thing. We were all too frightened.
For generation after generation, the Borges family of Kulahun survived the vicissitudes of war. The family home is still in ruins 15 years after the Indonesian army ravaged the city, but today they are citizens of an independent state.
Look, I got this invitation. It comes from the president himself.
What questions would you ask the president?
Oh, I don't know. I think I'd rather my husband ask the questions. It would be more appropriate.
The invitation for the Borges family is one for part of a generation that endured years of sacrifice and hardship, only to be left with nothing.
I have lots of things to ask the president, but my daughter told me not to talk to him. She said we shouldn't beg. I would ask him to rebuild the house, at least the roof, but they don't want me to talk, so I won't.
And how about you? Do you not have a few questions for the president too?
No, I don't. This invitation is for veterans, for the older generation, not their children.
Even if you had a chance to talk to him?
No, seriously. I don't want to ask anyone for anything.
This is Celestino da Silva, a 40-year-old taxi driver.
Hey, slow down. Where are you going?
Celestino survived the violence of the past relatively untouched, but he hasn't escaped the economic crisis of today. Recently, he lost his job. Like 1,000 others here, he was a driver for the United Nations during a decade of reconstruction. But the UN mission has ended, leaving a mixed mark on the country. And he was under few illusions when he bought his taxi.
Dili's expensive. Only the civil servants can make ends meet. The rest of us have to go to the pawn shop each week to get enough money for food and clothes.
The Timorese paid a heavy price for their independence. Youth unemployment in Dili stands at 40%, and most people have yet to benefit from the massive oil reserves beneath the Timor Sea.
We're all fishermen here, and we need one thing to work. It's oil. Timor has oil. So why is it so expensive? It's the UN's fault.
It's the same for me. People complain about the price of taxis, but we're ruled by the price of petrol. It's a vicious circle, and we can't do anything.
In one day you can make $10 or $20, but it doesn't cover our costs. We can't make ends meet. Nobody on this beach or anywhere else around here can make it. Really, it's a problem.
There are indeed many problems facing this young nation suddenly left to fend for itself. The lack of infrastructure, corruption, illiteracy, the list goes on. But generations of hardship have made the Timorese resilient.
I fish, like my father and grandfather did before me. I've tried jobs on the land, but I prefer to sell my fish in the streets than to have to wait until my salary at the end of the month to earn peanuts. This way, I'm sure I can eat every day. I'm fine.
Today is a holiday in Dili, and 3 generations of the Borges family have set out for one of the city's main attractions, Timor Plaza, the capital's only air-conditioned shopping mall.
Are we going too fast, Dad? Look, there's a lift. Is it a lift?
You can go on it. There are people in it.
For many, the highlight of Timor Plaza is its lift.
Is Dad coming with us?
I don't know, I don't think so.
Excuse me, sir, can old people go in the lift?
Yes, it's allowed.
Finally, though, only the daughter and granddaughter take the ride.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Were you scared?
No.
You see, she said she wasn't scared.
A ride in the lift, followed by long hours enjoying the air conditioning, with nothing to do or buy.
This is the symbol of our modern international Timor. But this is Timor for the rich and the foreigners. It's not ours.
On a beach on the outskirts of Dili lies a cemetery, the cemetery of the former United Nations car pool. Hundreds of vehicles sit here abandoned following the departure of international staff. Somewhere in there is an old car, the old life of Celestino.
The foreigners are leaving, so it's really a leap into the unknown for us Timorese. Now we have to depend almost entirely on the government. And that's what's dangerous, because they're corrupt and incapable.
Dili is facing tough times ahead. Frustration and anger are growing, and in some parts of the capital, the night belongs to the gangs. The police force, established and trained with foreign assistance, gets little respect from the locals. The police are viewed as a legacy of the UN mission that many Timorese came to resent, despite initially being seen as a protector and saviour of the country.
Let them go. Yes, they can leave. As Timorese, we will take care of our own problems. This is our home, our country. We fought for independence. So why should we rely on foreigners to decide our future for us?
The big day has arrived, the day of the meeting with the president. At Villabranca, everyone has risen early, even those who are not invited. Antonio, Alda and his brother Alfonso Veterans of the resistance have dressed in their finest clothes, but there is little for them to celebrate.
Today we mark the 10th anniversary of independence. And what have we gained? The men and women of Timor, the veterans. We can't even afford anything to eat or drink. I get $1 a day. Sometimes they give it to us, sometimes they forget. It's an insult to our sacrifice. The law says we should have our homes and possessions returned to us. I was captured by the Indonesians in 1979. They took everything from me. And now, I have nothing. I've got nothing in return. How can I eat on $1 a day? How? Before, during the revolution, I was someone important, a party member. And what am I today? A rodent, a tiny rodent.
Yes, he's become a real rodent, just a rodent. It's sad. He gave so many years to the independence movement, and look at his life today. It isn't fair. 13 years for the revolution and then this.
Yes, 13 years, for damn nothing.
We all get $1 a day, well, sometimes, and everything has to be bought with that single dollar.
The bus arriving at the presidential palace is filled with those who grew up under the Indonesian occupation, which left 200,000 dead in 25 years. The continued failure to rehabilitate tens of thousands of former resistance fighters is one of the main criticisms levelled at successive governments.
It's the first time we've come here. Do you know what to do? Do we have to sign a register? Where's the president? On the second floor?
I wonder what the president will say to us. We're all here to listen. Maybe there'll be some good news for a change. Or just nothing as usual.
The new president, Matan Ruak, is a legendary figure of the resistance after a life spent in the jungle as a guerrilla leader. Despite this historical legitimacy, the government no longer holds much currency with the people.
I've come today to talk about peace and the future, and to tell you that I support you.
My husband worked at the airport and he disappeared in 1975. They said he was killed because he was a communist. Why? I want to know.
This widow won't have any answers, and there will be no more questions today. Mr. President, do you understand the frustrations of the East Timorese with the economy and everything else?
Timor Leste is fighter. We do what no one is believed in our history.
Will you win the war against poverty?
Obviously.
It's over, and the president has gone. The Borges didn't dare say a word or raise a complaint. Printed on the banknotes of this young nation are the words unity and progress. Two dreams that maybe one day the Timorese will see realized. With Alda and Antonio, who once didn't even dare to think of independence, and Celestino trying hard to believe in the future and his luck, who knows how many generations of Timorese will continue to pin their hopes on distant tomorrows.
Life now in Dili, seen through the eyes of the Borges family. Well, that's it from Revisited for now. Stay tuned, of course, to France 24 for more editions.
The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Welcome back to Durian ASEAN. You're at the Durian Heat. We are talking about the Timor Leste, and you're with Grace.
And of course, this is Arlene. Earlier on, we discussed a lot about facts and figures on Timor Leste. Of course, a lot of people might not realize Timor Leste is an independent state situated in Southeast Asia, but they are not formally part of ASEAN. But there are many reasons I personally believe that Timor-Leste should be part of ASEAN.
Oh, that's very interesting. And then perhaps we can discuss and further and also shortly because it happened after Timor-Leste showed interest to join to ASEAN and they want to be part of the ASEAN. And also they said they're ready to join ASEAN.
In fact, Timor-Leste as the 11th member is very much welcome in somehow quite a lot of countries in Southeast Asia. I won't say all, but a lot of the countries in Southeast Asia are supportive of Timor-Leste joining ASEAN. But unfortunately, it seems like Timor-Leste is still not part of ASEAN membership despite being an independent state since early 2000.
And the reason of is it because of the economical state, or is it just that it doesn't meet the major requirement for ASEAN memberships? For example, perhaps the country was located in this region, but it has to open the embassies in ASEAN member countries. Perhaps what are the reasons that still is sort of pending to join ASEAN states?
According to an article that I'm reading right now, is definitely a lot of some of the countries in Southeast Asia believe that Timor-Leste is not yet ready to be absorbed into ASEAN, and there are many challenges and complexity of ASEAN membership apparently. So that means Timor-Leste still have a long way to go when it comes to trying to push itself into being part of ASEAN. There's a lot of divided voices when it comes to whether they should be part of ASEAN.
But on the other hand, joining ASEAN will provide Timor-Leste a lot of benefits. So it's coming from ASEAN to Timor-Leste the states, including in areas of trade, security, stability of the country, and also cultural exchange with ASEAN community. So of course, there are more things that we can give to Timor-Leste. So perhaps the ASEAN expectation is we have to collaborate to be part of the ASEAN members.
And on the other hand, talking about why I personally believe Timor-Leste should join ASEAN, maybe you can share yours as well, Grace, if you agree with me.
Sure.
I think for the last couple of years, you can see tremendous improvement in terms of Timor-Leste Human Development Index value for 2010, for example, is 0.502, placing it in the medium of human development category. While in there's a huge improvement in comparison to 5 years ago in 2005, where Timor-Leste's Human Development Index value was only at 0.428, and in fact it was much more worse when it was at when it gained independence in 2002. It was only at 0.375, and this is a great number considering that it is moving ahead of some older ASEAN members like Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar. They are only a bit behind Vietnam in the overall measure of human development. In fact, Timor-Leste was a ranking of 120 out of 169 country, which is great because that means Timor-Leste's human development, or in other words, human rights, is definitely above Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar.
So it shows that it's got a lot of preparation going on, and in fact, the government of Timor-Leste, they had established the institutional structure already for ASEAN's model, with the establishment of the focal point on ASEAN matters, such as a lot of human rights issues and the political issues, and they also would love to have a location for a specific budget for its capacity to build all those activities related to ASEAN.
And one of the interesting facts about Timor-Leste is, even though it's still a country that is being plagued by poverty, no doubt about it, but the country has managed to reduce child mortality and infant mortality, as well as both birth-mother mortality. Besides that, decreased number in terms of poverty, malaria, dengue, and not to mention that when it comes to literacy, it has been almost completely eliminated in Timor-Leste. In fact, it has completely eliminated by this year. Oh, wow. So that means if you go to Timor Leste, most probably you'll find people who know as much as you are.
That's exactly it. So we'll play one more excerpt from the YouTube video, and I hope that we can gain more knowledge about the Timor Leste.
Hello and welcome. The battle to free his small country from Indonesian rule took the lives of his family and friends and sent him into exile. But for nearly 4 decades he persisted and finally became a leading light for guiding his people. This week on One, meet Nobel Peace Laureate and East Timorese President José Ramos Horta. Life in the East Timorese capital, Dili, was challenging for his Portuguese father and East Timorese mother, but José Ramos Horta remembers a very large, close Catholic family with a strong sense of justice that ended up mourning the loss of 4 children at the hands of Indonesian forces, including his close brothers Guilherme and Nuno. Ramos Horta, a founding member of the Revolutionary Front for an Independent East Timor, or Fretilin movement, went on to become one of its leading spokesmen. From the mid-1970s, just as Indonesia invaded East Timor, Ramos Horta was the Fretilin permanent representative to the United Nations and spent many of the following years in exile, learning the workings of the UN intimately and building high-level relationships. In 1996, Ramos Horta, along with his fellow countryman Bishop Carlos Bellu, won the Nobel Peace Prize, boosting awareness of the small country's tense situation. An assassination attempt on Ramos Horta at his home in February of 2008, a year after being elected president, surprised many, as he's known to be an extremely popular and charismatic leader. But it reminded him that the challenging political story of East Timor is not over yet. Mr. President, I'm really glad to have this time with you. It's nice to speak with you.
Thank you.
You've helped to create a nation. You've been through so much getting to where you are, but your country still obviously has a lot of issues. In your personal and your professional life, what are your priorities? What's at the top of your list of priorities?
From when I was a child, a teenager, I was always sensitive, emotional, passionate about the suffering of poor people. So I champion, I advocate help to the poor, and we are getting there. I think we have the obligation to eliminate extreme poverty in my country within 10 years.
Now you, very sadly, you were shot in February of 2008 and were in a coma for 10 days. After you recovered, you said you remembered every moment, every detail of what happened. Take me through what happened through your eyes.
Yes. Well, first, background to it. In 2006, we had a major political crisis resulting from conflict within the army, within the police, serious turmoil in the city, not in the rest of the country. And some of the soldiers left the army and they went into the mountains, led by a major called Mr. Alfredo Reinaldo. From day one, when they left, I attempted to engage them in dialogue, met with them in the hills, different parts of the country, wherever they were, and established a line of communication with them. By the time I was shot, I had already a 3-month plan to completely resolve this problem. And it was known in the country, known to everybody, that I was in favor of dialogue, that I opposed the use of force against them. Everyone was surprised why José Ramos Horta, the president, was shot when he was, in fact, the one who was spending time with the rebels, talking with them, pacifying them. And they told me in the last meeting I had with them that I was the only leader in the country they trusted. I was the only one clean from the crisis in 2006. And then a month later, I'm shot. Well, that morning I went out as usual, early in the morning, 6 a.m. for my power walk exercise. I heard shots on my way back, and we identified the source of the shots coming from my residence. Instinctively I decided to go there because I was concerned about the people in my house, and confident or overconfident that once I'm there, whatever the shooting that takes place, who was shooting who, they would stop. As it happened in 2006, during the crisis in my country, I was all over town. Everywhere there was fighting, I would go and pacify the people, and nothing happened to me. And I could have been killed in 2006. I was in the middle of the fighting with machetes, with slingshots everywhere, and nothing happened to me. So I was overconfident that my appearance alone would make them stop shooting, without realizing that, of course, the shooting happened when the rebels entered my house and disarmed some of my soldiers, but one of them, more alert, shot and killed the rebel leader and his bodyguard. One of them, who was there, knew I would be arriving, ambushed me as I approached my gate. From about 20 meters, I saw him. He aimed his gun at me, a powerful rifle. I turned to run, and then when he hit me first near my shoulder, I felt the burning of it, and then I dived, and the second shot hit me here. This was the most serious. Two, self-explosive bullets. And yet, when I fell, I didn't panic. I got the phone from my pocket. I called my chief of staff to tell her what happened to me. So I was totally alert, and then I was taken in an ambulance 20-30 minutes later to an Australian Army military clinic. That's where they saved me. They did a fantastic job.
Considering what you've been through now and looking back on all you've experienced, even from this assassination attempt, how has it changed your personal philosophy in life? How do you approach life nowadays?
Well, it's strange enough, I haven't had any nightmares, any bad dreams. Maybe later, I don't know. It's now many months passed. I went back to my house. I was told not to go back to my house, that I would have nightmares. Absolutely nothing. I've had very good sleep. Well, I saw death. I saw the ugliness, the darkness of death. And I came back to life because I was near death. And make me more, obviously, opposed to violence. I harbor no resentment or feeling of revenge toward those who shot me. They're all in jail now. I visit them, and I make sure that no one harmed them. So if anything, I hope that it make me into an even better human being.
Let's go back through your family history. You were born in Dili, in the East Timor capital, and to a Timorese mother and a Portuguese father who himself was in exile.
Yes.
What do you remember of those early years?
Well, my father came to Timor in the 30s. He was a sergeant in the Portuguese Navy. He and other officers in the 30s tried to take 2 warships from the Portuguese Navy to go to Spain to join the Republicans in the fight against Franco. Well, their attempt failed. My father was deported to Timor. Well, this is one of those, absurdities, ironies of history, that I am a product of the Spanish Civil War. If it were not for the Spanish Civil War, my father would not have been involved in the mutiny to help the Republicans. He would not have been deported to Timor, and I would never have been born.
You even had a grandfather who was sent into exile.
My grandfather was also an anarchist in jail in Portugal, then was deported to Timor as well.
How are these characters in your life influenced yourself? How do you think they've shaped your own character?
I think the only influence on me, plus the influence of my upbringing in Catholic Church, is my profound, deep sense of fairness, of justice. I am absolutely against injustice on poor people, on weak people.
You were part of a huge family, a dozen children. Your mother must have had a very hard time keeping you all together.
Oh, yes, yeah.
What sort of characteristics did you get from her? What was she like as a character?
Oh, my mother, she is very talkative, very opinionated, so talkative. And she doesn't understand what's going on. Sometimes, like, there is the only country she knows is Indonesia, Australia, Portugal. If she watches news on, for instance, floods in Bangladesh, she said, wow, so bad in Indonesia. What's happening there? I said, listen, lady, if you pay attention, you would notice that this is not Indonesia. They're talking about Bangladesh. She's a great woman. Suffered a lot with us, 11 kids. Survived World War II in Timor. Survived Indonesian occupation. Witnessed the killing of my brothers and sisters, her children. So she suffered a lot.
You lost 4 brothers and sisters.
Yes, 4 brothers and sisters. At least 2 of them have been buried. Other 2, we even don't know where they were killed. Somewhere in my country during the Indonesian occupation. We don't even know where they were killed so that we could exhume their bodies and rebury them with dignity.
The small village, Sobaida, where you went to the Catholic missionary school and you were educated, it actually became the headquarters for the Fretilin, the Revolutionary Front for an Independent East Timor, which you were a co-founder of. How did things change in that time with the formation of Fretilin and a movement for independence?
Well, I grew up in that Catholic school, extremely conservative Catholic school. You have to pray, 10 times a day, and Mass every day. Then every evening you have to confess your sins to the priest. Can you imagine? I was 6, 7 years old. What sins you have? But you have to confess. And I didn't have anything to confess. And if you don't confess, the priest is upset with you. He doesn't forgive you. So I would make up sins, just to make up so that he would leave me alone. It became headquarters in the beginning of our resistance, but it was overrun, and the movement then split and went into different parts of the country. We ceased to have a permanent base because the island is small. The Indonesian forces were always chasing the resistance. So there were no fixed headquarters.
But of course your life was soon to turn upside down. I'm going to touch on that in a moment. We have to take a short break here. We'll be back with more one-on-one with President Jose Ramos Horta in just a moment. Welcome back. You're watching 101. We're speaking with East Timorese President Jose Ramos Horta, Nobel Peace Laureate from 1996. Now, in your, apart from the Nobel Peace Prize, obviously a huge defining moment, in your eyes, what were the key moments in your life? What were the defining moments?
Yes, besides the Nobel Peace Prize, which embarrassed me, shocked me, I never expected it. I was in Sydney at the time. I was lecturing at the University of New South Wales. I lectured human rights. So I went out to practicing tennis on the Friday with a small niece, 4 years old, Sarah. She adored me, always followed me everywhere. And after tennis, I came back home to a very miserable apartment where my mother lived in the suburbs of Sydney. The phone rang, went to the phone. I was told by a journalist in Lisbon, can you comment, please? You have just won the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, I was shocked, embarrassed. Then returning to Timor in triumph, December 1st, 1999. After 24 years in exile, I arrived back home. Thousands and thousands of people welcomed me. Again, that was shock. I knew I was sort of popular. If 100 people had been there, I would have been surprised. But there were estimated 10,000 people there. I was very touched and humbled by that, because those who welcomed me were those who never left the country. They endured much more suffering than me. I was in New York, I was in Europe, I was in Australia. You cannot suffer that much.
I read actually how yourself and Bishop Carlos Belu got the prize together, but you said that Xanana Gusmao, who became the first president of East Timor, who was actually in jail at the time,
yes,
you
exactly.
felt he deserved it better.
Yes, exactly. I was very embarrassed, and actually for a few days I hesitated talking with him, I said, God, how am I going to face this? I won a Nobel Peace Prize. He's the one who should do it. Then I spoke with him, finally, through illegal communication with him. He had a phone in his cell, and we often communicated. And he was so warm about it, so good about it, that it did help me. I no longer felt embarrassed about it.
You were active, though, from a very early age. In your 20s already, you were so active in promoting the idea of independence for East Timor. You were actually sent off into exile, and you spent a good, 24 years away?
Yes, 24 years abroad. I was in New York 15 years. I was then got really burned out in New York, no money. I arrived in the midst of winter in New York. I had never seen snow in my life, had never been to the UN. And my mission was to lobby the United Nations to take action on Indonesia's occupation of East Timor. I met with members of the Security Council, met with the then Soviet ambassador to the UN, Jacob Malik, who had been with the UN since San Francisco, 1945. Well, as I was talking with him, he was sleeping. And back then I was very polite. Today I can be very rude with people, but back then I was young, coming out of Catholic school, Timorese village. Well, I was very polite, and because he was sleeping, I talked softly, and the more softly I talked, the more apparently he was sleeping, and I didn't want to wake him up because I thought he would be upset if I wake him up, and then he would not support us. But his aide was nodding to me to keep talking. That was my first experience with the UN, with Jacob Malik.
How much did the increase of your profile once you had the Nobel Peace Prize, how much did that help your cause and raise your voice? Did people listen that much more?
Yes, that helped enormously, opened the doors to me everywhere in Washington. And I have to say, as we talk, reflecting on my experience, one institution on this planet that I'm very grateful to is the U.S. Congress. The administration was pretty much against us, but I then would go to Congress and found so many friends. God, from Senator Ted Kennedy, this giant of American politics, liberal politics, to Senator Tom Harkin, to Congressman Tony Hall, now he's no longer in office, Nancy Pelosi, some fantastic individuals who taught me that the U.S. is not all bad. When you are disappointed with the administration and you get angry, but then you realize that there are people who are good, and they helped tremendously. If anyone contributed to our freedom, was members of the U.S. Congress.
Considering all you've been through, and we discussed a lot of this, personal family loss, the killing of so many of your people when the Indonesian troops came in, the years of exile you spent, and everything else. How do you think it shaped you as a person now? When you look back, how differently do you think you've come out? You say you're not angry about anything, really, are you?
No, I'm not. I could be angry at Indonesia. My mother is angry, but I have been one of the architects of the normalization of relations with Indonesia for two reasons. One, pragmatism. A giant neighbor, Indonesia and Australia, our two neighbors. Second, Indonesians also were victims. Hundreds of thousands died during the Suharto era, victimized by the Cold War. In 1999, the Indonesians freed themselves from the Suharto regime. As they freed themselves, they also walk away from East Timor. Well, and then they face the transition into democracy, very difficult challenges, internal challenges of all sorts. I would be irresponsible and it would be unfair to Indonesia if I were to call for an international tribunal, as some people demanded, an international tribunal on Indonesia. I have said even to my own people, we achieve our independence, our freedom, not through a military victory, but because Indonesia also changed. If Indonesia had not changed, we would not be free today. So let's forget the past and normalize the relation with Indonesia. And today we have an excellent relation with Indonesia and Australia.
Do you get time for yourself? Do you get a chance to pursue hobbies, do the things you want to do?
Yes, I enjoy particularly movies, all kinds of movies. I don't like too intellectual movies, some of the French movies are too philosophical, too intellectual.
You want to escape,
Yes, at the end of the day, I want to see aliens, Star Trek, some Bruce Willis, action-packed movie. No, I'm not into...
You've lived an action-packed life.
Yes.
You've been shot more times than Bruce Willis in real life.
Exactly. I'm not into philosophical, intellectual movies. No, at the end of the day, what do you want? You want even continuing philosophical discussions in the evening? No, people say I have sense of humor, and sometimes even with serious things I joke about it because it's like escape, self-defense mechanism. Sometimes even in the midst of trouble, I make a joke, and it is a self-defense mechanism. And so I avoid. At the end of the day, I prefer to watch movies. I read books, go out with friends. In Timor, we don't have too much entertainment.
You concentrate on the people?
Yes, concentrate on the people. I enjoy the common people. I enjoy the poor people. You learn so much from them.
If you were to be remembered a certain way, your legacy, what would you like that legacy to be?
Well, that I stood for the poor, but in some way I help some of them. I don't care much about, monuments and streets in my name. The reality is, on this earth, when we are alive, we try to help others. I try to help people one by one. I don't have this. I would like to help humanity. I like to help the whole country. But one thing I do, and I'm proud of, is that every day of my life I help someone. $100 here, $1,000 there, $10,000 there. Either myself doing it, or I get people to help. If each of us do that, depend on our resources, we would have help many millions of poor around the world.
Well, Mr. President, I wish you a long life and more power to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you.